the dawn of deep tech, the kernel of carbon, the Iniesta of integrated systems, the only man to ever move from perfectly weighted through walls to perfectly optimized direct air capture, doing for e-fuels generation what Willy Wonka did for chocolate factories. Some call him the Dumbledore of Dad. Others say he'll be the first person to actually affect the net worth of the Collison brothers. What he is doing is putting Wiltshire back on the map while single-handedly brute-forcing British energy security. Harvey Hodd, it's a real pleasure to have you here in London.
I see you've done your
Welcome to
research.
Unreasonable.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's very nice to have you here. I'm just going to go straight into it. So you've chosen a good quest. You've chosen a big, complicated, meaty, good quest. Can you tell us what that quest is? And can you tell us how you came to it?
So our aim is to make life sustainable on Earth. And really how we're doing that at Rivan is we're a synthetic fuel manufacturer. So we're aiming to make synthetic fuels extremely cheap, extremely scalable, and to stop drilling for natural resource. And yeah, this is years in the making. I think it will take us the next 10, 15, 20 years to fully have an impact and get into our stride. But fundamentally, we saw this as a way to ultimately make the environment and the atmosphere we live in sustainable and do so in a commercially viable way.
So specifically, I think the thing I'm really interested in is this isn't your first time as an entrepreneur. You've done a bunch of stuff before. This isn't an obvious problem to go and solve, or maybe to you it is. Can you tell us a bit more about how you explored the universe of available quests and found this quest?
Sure. So I think had a couple of companies before this, did fairly well, came out of them wanting to it sounds really fluffy, but like have an impact. I kind of got away from just wanting to work on like kind of whatever the next thing was and wanted to have something that was compounding over the next 10 or 20 years. And I really just optimized you start with that question. Okay, how can you make life sustainable on Earth? And if you work back from that, basically everything anchors on CO2 in the air. And I came to the conclusion that one, there wasn't a way to do that very cheaply. And two, 20% of the world's energy can't be electrified. So we're going to constantly need vast amounts of fuels. So these are kind of antagonistic. And I looked into loads of things even before this, though. I looked into mining and machining and minerals and carbon capture and synthetic fuels and batteries and solar, and really where anything I thought was objectively important that wasn't yet being built. But really it all came down to like the largest thing we could do, or the biggest impact we could do right now, is to create a commercially viable way to capture vast amounts of carbon, stop drilling for natural resource. And it felt like a problem that outweighed all the rest, where monetarily kind of it can be huge, but actually the impact, like Tesla has had on EVs, for example, can be a catalyst for change. And I didn't really see that in other industries. That's number one. And then number two, also, I think we're at a time where it's the first time in history this could be possible. And I think it is worth running at and running towards the risks where others potentially don't.
And how did you go about breaking down the problem? Like, okay, I want to create an impact to arriving at synthetic fuels and Rivan.
I think I just started with kind of what do we know to be true today? And what are the base principles of this? In that synthetic fuels, for example, it's still hypotheses that they're a really good way to capture carbon profitably. We think they are, but synthetic fuels fundamentally have thermodynamic challenges that are very well known. Like the pathway has been known for the last 50, 60 years. But when I say thermodynamic challenges, you just need vast amounts of energy, number one, and you need a load of hardware, number two. And really, if you say synthetic fuels are expensive, they're expensive because of those two things. I just looked into, are they still true? Those assumptions today, like they have been for the last 50 years? And if not, what is my ability to make them different and change them? And I came to the conclusion that energy is actually the cheapest electricity possible ever is now, like today, for example, with solar. And the learning rate of solar. And number two is hardware. If you actually in-house hardware, you can drop the cost of it dramatically. There's loads of corollaries akin to kind of SpaceX and others. And you put those together and actually all the economics and all the physics make sense. So I kind of started with the base physics and said, okay, what ability do we have to actually do this? Everything on top of that is kind of execution and coordination, I would say.
I'm just going to pause for a second because you've made something that's like unbelievably complicated sound like, well, I just like started with the chemistry and then I moved into the physics, and like 99.99% of people will never go into that way of thinking about it. I think what Christian and I find really interesting or fascinating about something like that is like, how do you persuade yourself that that's, because you've gone to like degree level science now, right? Or like at least probably like late school level science. I don't know if you have it. I don't think you have a technical background like
Nope.
that.
Not
so like
officially.
Yeah. What does the process look like? What did the process look like of getting yourself from like, cool, yeah, like we need to suck carbon out of the atmosphere to that like very distilled, drilled down, like molecular level understanding? And like, how did, I suppose, the motivation and the confidence work within that?
I think firstly, I've always been interested in complex systems. I just find like a maze or a mosaic of how everything connects really enthralling and energizing, first and foremost, with everything since I was very young. And I think what I tried to do was just bound the problem. Often these things are hyper nebulous or just super ill-defined as to where, like you said, where do we start and where does that go? And I think if you try and bound the problem, e.g., okay, if you look at DAT, for example, and capturing carbon from the air, say, okay, well, what are all the available options and pathways that we can actually do that? And what are all the constituent parts that make them either non-scalable or expensive, or kind of where are we at with all of them? And you just lay out like a bounded problem. And where I'm really interested, and where you mentioned about motivation, is I enjoy trying to connect the dots up and see what the relationship is between all of them, both on a kind of technical and mechanical and engineering basis. But then you wrap that. I'm also very interested in business strategy and resource allocation and timing and capital markets and things like that. And I think mostly it was just a factor of found the problem, find out what we know to be true today, challenge the reasoning behind why that's the case, and try and connect up the dots. And therefore, you go down so many dead ends. And you, with each additional marginal dead end, though, you're gradually refining it.
So it's just like a decision tree.
Yeah, exactly. You just branch out or branch in. And I did that for about 18 months before starting the company as well. So there's no employees. We raised no capital. I leased a small factory in East London and just tinkered away on all the calculations and the reactors and things like that. I got some great early kind of iterations of our designs, albeit rough compared to what we work on now. And that for me was, what I love, going into something that ambiguous and trying to reason up from what I know to be true.
And is that because you're an unusual founder type, and well, actually, it's quite a common founder type, but usually in the UK, and that you've been in the kind of professional youth football setup and done a bunch of businesses. Is this something that you think is innate in you, or do you think you learned this way of thinking over? Was it almost the learning the way of thinking was almost an iterative process in and of itself?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it was necessarily innate. I think if you look back at my two prior businesses, they were nowhere near. One, I never felt like I got into my kind of realm or speed almost, or just style, but I did learn what was right and wrong. And so I think in my first business, it was very much kind of like many young entrepreneurs, do what is commonly accepted and what people tell you to do, and listen to that advice. And I gradually built up enough confidence with enough mistakes that suggested otherwise. And I think I've just applied that to the nth degree at Rivan early on, just saying, okay, it really just, everything is just, what do we know is foundationally true, and reason up, and you can apply that to everything. And I think what allows us to have confidence to even do this thing, because it's not, this isn't an opinion. Suddenly it's like, actually, no, these things are just objectively true. And yeah, it's definitely a learned way of thinking though, and is constantly being iterated on, I would say.
Do you think you can hack that way of thinking? Like, do you think you could have got to business 3 at business 1? Would there have been models that you could have kind of skipped those processes?
Maybe. I think it was very useful, and I think back to this quite a lot. I think it was very useful to see how it could go badly though. So like those businesses did well, like objectively did well, but like they weren't game changing, and they didn't really change the status quo, you know. They're not going to be remembered. And I think it was good to see how it can go the other way. Otherwise, I don't think I would have the confidence nor the dogmatic kind of approach to what we do now, because I've seen how it goes the other way. I think that was important. I think if you don't have that basis, it's almost like working really hard on a project and then something like it comes to fruition. If you jump just straight to that fruition without the hard work, I think it loses a bit of its meaning and depth.
And you being self-taught and kind of like jumping into the problem as a generalist, kind of nailing down, does that also tailor the way you hire and then the way you look for talent? Because also specialists, they help you advance, but also they come with a lot of built-in assumptions.
100%. I think the key trait that I didn't appreciate or maybe articulate or quantify before is just a level of agency to go and do something. Because everything we've kind of just suggested is like fairly well-known frameworks, but the agency to delve into that. So when you hit a roadblock and there's cognitive load and you have to push past it, like those elements are just like people with high agency will go and do that and others won't. That's really what we optimize for. And that manifests in people's careers in different interesting ways where as a result of that, we look for personal projects massively, like have people tinkered on things outside of uni, outside of work, when they didn't have the constraints around them.
Weird hobbies.
Yeah, like things like that, where I'm less concerned about a traditional CV. I would actually go the other way and say we don't really look for kind of elite uni, kind of consultancy role, big, great logo, things like that, because it kind of doesn't teach you a way of thinking from first principles originally, like yourself, that is critical for something like we're doing. So yeah, indefinitely. And then I think as we grow, we're now looking for more specialization. That doesn't mean you get rid of the agency, though. I think it's probably the limiting factor in most organizations, I would say.
Agency, I feel like, is the word of the year, maybe the word of the decade, and high agency has become a bit of a meme.
Yeah, I know.
In good ways and bad. I think there are a lot of good things about it. Talk to us about getting stuck. You talked about it there of like when you hit walls, and it sounds like you don't frame getting stuck as an end. You frame it as like almost like this a route on a decision tree that you then have to reverse back from and go again. Like, how do you think? Because with what you're doing at the moment, you must get stuck constantly, daily, like all the time. How does that work?
Yeah, I think you just have to apply exactly as you said, the same thinking in that it goes back to making decisions. We make suboptimal decisions constantly because the information available to us is not complete. And therefore, we will make a decision with suboptimal information. We'll get stuck, take a step back and say, okay, well, what do we know to be true out of these things? Again, it's really important, I think, whenever you get stuck on a problem, is that you know all the constituent variables that are associated with it. You take the reactor design and say, okay, well, we're stuck on this one thing. Now, what do we know across the whole plethora of things that influence that? And say, well, again, just break it down. Why are we stuck today? What did we do differently? Can we take a step back? Everything we do is a hypothesis. So maybe it was just an invalidated hypothesis and now we need to go for a different one. And I think really, therefore, we frame all decisions on action creates information. So just do that next thing and we'll be slightly better placed to make another decision after the fact. Okay. And therefore getting blocked and things like that, I'm not sure really matter. The faster we can do that, the better. And that's why we have so many failed tests and so many kind of dead ends that we go down with our R&D and things like that, because fundamentally, the faster we do that, I know it sounds like a trope almost now, but it is the only way to keep iterating.
Yeah, so it's reframing frustration, dead ends, failures as parts of an iterative learning process that are almost to be celebrated in and of themselves because they capture information which will then inform things in the future.
Exactly. And also because we know the end state is a reality. I think what a good example of this is in my first companies, we struggled, especially the first one, struggled to find product market fit. So we had great people that were kind of what I would call spinning the wheels, where they were kind of okay, we have this product and we're trying to get it to market. We're trying to sell it into a customer base and we're going to do all of these actions to try and enable that. Mm-hmm. And many of them didn't work. And that is a fundamental blocker, causes frustration. You're applying loads of energy. You're not getting anything back. You get drained over time, et cetera, et cetera. But that's because we didn't know fundamentally whether that would work. And we didn't know actually if there was product market fit on the other side of the horizon. Whereas with Rivan, we know that everything is true. We know that it will work. We know we've validated all the core assumptions. So really, it's just a bridge to the thing that we know to be true. So it means motivation is always very high because it doesn't mean that what we're doing is fundamentally right. It's just the route we have taken at any given instance.
Levelized cost of methane at a certain price or whatever it is.
In the pathway we're doing. Yeah, exactly. Because we've validated all the core underlying assumptions. So it does mean that all of these blockers are just individual execution. They're not fundamentally wrong. And then I think we can take a slightly different stance of them as such and don't really frame them as oh, we're stuck, whatever, because it is just a execution route and it's transient. It will change tomorrow, change next week. It's not like the business fundamentally won't work or the product won't work.
And when you think of the podcast is about ambition and kind of celebrating and preaching ambition to the next generation of founders, did you always have this level of ambition, or was it something that you needed to live through the processes and challenges you've had? Or was it something that since you were a kid, you always had that?
I've always been very driven at kind of whatever I do. I think that probably manifested in football, manifested in first businesses, manifested on not going to like the traditional path through uni and things like that. Albeit I think my main driver, or the reason that's the case, is often I'm just trying to see where the limits are and see what I'm capable of, or like I have a deep rooted belief that I can do useful, good, big things. And I think I'm forever chasing that. And I think that means that there's no immediate end point. It's why it didn't end on like, a fairly big business exit on my second business. It was just a tiny little stepping stone to what was next, and not this end state of, capital, and then I'm going to go and do some abstracted form of like whatever else. And like, yeah, I think it's kind of innate, but it comes from a place of just wanting to do better, like work with higher integrity and optimize for entirely that. And therefore it's just never going to be an end state. It's just going to keep going.
And how do you think about, because I find that so interesting from a perspective of, like, one of your investors called you completely relentless, and it was a compliment, I think. But like, being a bit vulnerable here, I struggle with when I get into like a quite relentless mode of working, because I can feel the cracks starting to show. I fear the cracks, or I fear what the cracks could become, which I think holds me back sometimes from working in a way that I probably could.
And when you say cracks, as in,
I suppose it's
drained.
It's the drain,
Yeah.
it's self-doubt, it's the idea that you couldn't keep performing at this level and for like on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
How do you keep yourself like running like a really efficient machine in that sense? And is it mental? Is it physical? Is it a combination of both? Do you practice things? Is it like a way of living, or is it kind of just, this is the machine that Harvey has built, is built of, and that's how you operate?
The poor answer is almost the latter. My girlfriend speaks about this quite a lot, and I've spoken to her. We've been together 10 years now, so she's seen the gradual.
She fears you.
Yeah, the gradual kind of growth through the business. I think one, like, definitely look after myself. In terms of like, no drinking, try and get as much sleep as possible, exercise a fair bit where I can. But I do just take a huge amount of energy from the work I do, in that, like, I don't feel drained doing 90, 100-hour weeks constantly. I don't really get ill. I don't really, or, like pick up a cold or whatever. And yeah, it's not because like I decided to just do that. I just enjoy it. I take a lot of energy from it. I think others don't. There's actually a great, book, paper called, I think it's The Mediocrity of Excellence, which is a strange title, about Olympic swimmers, how so many people say, like, they train so much, they must get so drained. And actually there's this really interesting anecdote where someone goes and lives with these Olympic swimmers in 1989, and they turn up for their swim training like 4:30 in the morning. And the real difference between like amateur swimmers that also did that and they tracked them for like a year, and these elite swimmers, is the elite swimmers turned up and they were full of energy and they were joking and they were jovial, and it was such an obvious thing that that's what they were going to do. They took so much energy from it. And the whole point of the mediocrity of excellence was that it wasn't that they were just so fundamentally different. They just enjoyed being there. Yeah. And that was the 5-10% extra. And I honestly, that's for me. I get extremely fired up by working, very early or very late on complex problems. And I think that's luckily something that I've kind of got innately in.
Which kind of tells you that if the x-axis is good quest, the y-axis is right quest.
Yes.
It's like, and you want to be top corner of that. There must still, though, be moments where it feels like things are falling apart. Like there must be probably a bit less now, because more now. I suppose less existential, right? You've got a bit more cash in the bank to play with. But what do you tell yourself in those moments? It sounds like you have a quite healthy relationship with I suppose the way you feel about stuff, and you can almost communicate with your feelings. Like, how do you talk to yourself when it feels like everything in the business is falling apart?
Great question. I'm not sure. We're constantly, I think, number one, we optimize for that chaos. If it isn't reflecting or isn't surfacing, it suggests we're being way too easy and going a bit slow. I think it probably goes back to how I would solve problems. It's just a reflection of a different type of problem. It'd be the exact same in engineering, where there's some big thing has happened that is bad. Like, what do we know to be true? What are all the constituent parts to this? Have I influenced them in the way that I think is right? If execution is off, then that's you've got to take a look at that and say, like, why was that off? Often it's not. It's actually like strategy was a bit off or something like that. But I think no hard or fast rule. More just, again, reason, don't get overawed by this huge problem and then stack it with loads of others. Try and isolate it as much as possible, because all you need to do in that next instance, akin to what we said earlier, is just get more information on the next step and take a tiny baby step. And if that takes an hour and you all come back and meet again as another meeting because we've done something else, we should do that. And then the next meeting is going to be a 2-hour cadence, and we're just going to keep it graduating out. I think slice down the problem, act on it. Anxiety is created because of unknowns, and what do we do now? People are paralyzed by that. I generally just don't have that.
And maybe can you give an example when being fast is just more important than being right?
You can apply that to everything at Rivan, basically. Seriously, and so many people originally, like, we put out this manifesto and said, hey, these are the things we're going to do. We could have taken 10 years to validate or disprove that, but like, we put 10 hypotheses on the wall and said, okay, well, hopefully most of these are validated. If they're not, we can't really be a business, it won't work. And our job isn't to be perfect here, it's to be directionally sound. And you could apply that to our entire pilot plant. So we had a large-scale pilot plant last year as the first big thing we did. The designs were poor. You know, they're not spec'd effectively. Like, the operation was average, the costs were too high, but we got it out there 2 years quicker than anyone else, and we got such an internal degree of confidence and scar tissue and information that it was unbelievably the better choice to be quick than right. Right being like a great design and spec and things like that. And I'd also say, like, so there's two options. You're either right and you take a longer time frame for it to gestate or manifest, or you're wrong quickly and you get more information, so you make a better decision next time. We've just optimized that on everything. There comes a time when, you know, if you're in like a regulated environment, you're going to have to increase the degree to which you're right. But I think honestly, we focus on being about 75% right on most things. You could apply that to goal setting and say, well, if we're hitting 90, 100 all the time, that's probably not aggressive enough. And if we're hitting 60, we're probably poor in our original estimate and hypotheses. Somewhere along that suggests you're at this inflection point of learning, and that's all we optimize for.
Tell us about the kettle.
The kettle.
The office kettle.
Oh, the hot water kettle. That's a very niche example of our culture manifesting.
That's what I thought.
We try. So we have a general saying. It's actually up on our office called "Does it make the boat go faster?" And it was originally made famous by a rower called Ben Hutton Davies, who was captain of the British rowing team, and it was anchoring every decision on would it make the boat go faster? The rowing team, we used to be really bad, like really, really poor, and it was like, do we go out drinking? Well, no, it doesn't make the boat go faster. And should we do this training session, etc., etc.? And we tried to apply that in all manner of things at Rivan. And we had this kettle. This is a really small niche example.
I love that.
We had this kettle that just took forever to boil. And like, we had like 12 engineers who were just waiting for this kettle. So we ended up getting this again, sounds trivial, this big hot water vessel, or this geyser that is constantly at boiling temperature. So people are just in and out. We've now got like multiple concurrent coffee machines, so we can have those running at any one point, so they're always quick. And small things to reduce drag have a massive impact.
10 minutes a day, that's 200 minutes a month. That's like a really relevant amount of time.
And think about how much we're growing as well. We're adding 30 people now on top of 35. We'll add another 100 shortly. Like, it starts to really add up. And I think we now need to filter that way more across the organization. Yeah, there are a lot of good. I think if you have good people, really good people, all of these things actually make a lot of sense.
5 minutes later.
We have loads, like we have a go-kart that gets us around the corner to Screwfix, which is like a 500-meter journey away, and we get there so much quicker because of this go-kart. we go kind of 5 or 6 times a day.
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, well, we're the biggest customer of Screwfix in South London where we are, and yeah, I think lots of examples of that. If we truly give it, only really works there if we know the actions that we're doing actually have business outcome.
And I think a big part of ambition and because you're basically translating a truth that is in your brain and trying to bring it into reality. But not always it's easy to bring that truth in your brain to words and to a vision that you can communicate with people. How was it in the early days and now when you're speaking with experts, when you're speaking with investors and talent, to transport the vision of Rivan that you have in the future and that ambition in your brain into something that's real and yeah,
it's tough. I think you could apply the same way. I'm currently applying a similar framework to what we said about the technical challenges. in that we could bound this problem and say, okay, well, what is the end state and what are all the steps and the constituent parts to get us there? And we're on step 2 and there's 10 steps. And I think if you can articulate that you know the entire journey and that you're on a small progression, I think that becomes, not believable is the wrong word, but you can get behind it because it's like clear that there's a holistic approach to this thing. Whereas I think oftentimes it's like current state and that is it in like a deck or like a written communication of some sort. It's like, here's what we do. And it's like, well, that kind of misses the broader context as to why that's important. How long have we got? Like, you mentioned how to communicate with others. I think I laid out at the start of Rivan just 10 key hypotheses that said, this is what we want to make cheapest synthetic fuels in the world and ultimately stop drilling. As a result of that, these 10 things need to be true. And we will basically do no other work than try and validate or disprove these 10 things. If enough of them are disproven, Rivan can't really exist. If enough of them are validated, great. Like we actually maybe have a slim chance of making this work. That just anchors everyone on yes, there's this grandiose mission, but like, what can we tangibly do today? And to that degree, I've become very, very interested. I talk about this all the time in our monthly retros, and we've got one tomorrow, where if you're an intern and you've just started with us and you're wiring a single sensor, you should, if we've done it well enough, have this intuition that what you're doing has this cascade from like an hour-long task to the daily task that you've got set with your team, to a weekly priority that your entire team has, a monthly milestone that like the entire company anchors on, to a yearly goal that we've set out, to this grandiose mission right at the top. And you should know the weight right up there. And if you do, and you can see it up and down, suddenly like it's just a beautiful organization to work in. That's what we've been trying to do a lot. And that you should be able to reason right off the chain and down, even if you're the single most junior member on their first day, I would say.
It's a really lovely way of encapsulating it. I think I said this to you when we first met. The manifesto, I knew I wanted to invest in your company from that manifesto. Like, I remember reading it like 3 years ago. And it's a very rare example of someone taking an unbelievably complicated problem and writing it in human language. And I would say, like, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass here, but like, I think you're an excellent written communicator. And I think what's doubly impressive or interesting about it is you put yourself out there really early in a topic that, with all due respect, you knew very little about versus people who've spent their lives working on this. How has clarity of communication and thought in that sense played into this? Like, is this something you've learned over time? Is this something you've always had? Because it feels to me like one of the ways in which Rivan has achieved what it has is by setting these kind of stakes in the ground of like you talk about with these 10 ideas, and then almost by putting them out publicly, being like, cool, we got to do it now.
Yeah, I think number one is I think I can get much better at that, and it's a learned process in terms of communication and distilling something in its simple form. I do think a good general heuristic is try and write something and then basically fight every word. The manifesto is a good example where it can be done a lot better, but like, if you have 100 words, like your job is to get it to 50 and say the same thing. I think
You're some headline writer.
Yeah, well, that I've started trying to think of quite a lot. But anyway, I think the reason that I put that out at the start and the reason we've done that fairly consistently is because, again, it just reasons from base principles of what's true today.
Except for football, you never worked for anyone else, right? How do you set a bar for excellence in that world? It's like, I suppose football, it's quite straightforward, right? You see the privacy, as in the bar is somewhere. You see the bar and you're like, okay, how do I optimize everything I do to get to that bar? Yeah. It's a simple, hard problem, I suppose. How does that work for you as an entrepreneur? Because you don't have that reference point. And obviously, like when we look at entrepreneurs from an investment perspective, it's often like, did they work at Stripe? Did they work at DeepMind? Have they been somewhere where they've seen what real excellence looks like? You've almost like self-crafted that or self-taught that through a bunch of organizations. What's your relationship with that, and how has it changed over time?
I think it's changed over time just because I've been exposed to a greater degree of what can be possible. And number one, again, just like I love and I'd like to spend more time in other organizations, seeing what that's like. But really, it's just a personal taste. I think fundamentally, it's trying to hold anything to my account ultimately, or to what would I hold myself to the quality of this thing or project or whatever it is. And I think if you hire brilliant people and have brilliant people around, they'll also hold it to their account. And sometimes that's higher than yours, which is great. It's what we kind of optimize for. So it's less a hard and fast. It's more, if someone asked you today and said, oh, you just delivered this amazing piece of work, and they said, is this the best you could the greatest execution of this? if you can honestly say yes, and like you're being very honest, and you've left everything out in the field, I don't think there's really much above that. I think it's just so few people ever get to that, and they're always leaving the last 20% because there's laziness, or there's lack of time, or lack of preparation, or things like that.
But isn't one of the key tenets of Rivan to try and not build the perfect system, to build the most functional system? So like what does that tension look like internally between build it and build it perfect, build it fast and build it perfectly?
Sure, but they're not mutually exclusive, where we've almost suggested excellence is just the output of something. Excellence might be that we just get this tiny piece of information twice as quick as anyone else.
About setting a framework for excellence and everything.
Well, it's just like, what is our optimized outcome almost, Stripe, it might be this beautiful dashboard, and that actually might take 3 times longer than Rust, but that's what they're optimizing for, and they don't care. And whereas for us, like you said, we don't. We've got a load of our kind of cultural standpoints or principles on our site. One of which is that we don't plan to the nth degree, and we try and just get as much information in the door as possible. Because going back to the point of information is incomplete all the time. Our job is just to get more of it. It's not to make the perfect decision. If you think you're making the perfect decision, you're biased and you're ignorant. And really, therefore, we try and just make decisions where there is a balance. Obviously, you can't make a decision and it's drastically bad, but fundamentally just make quick decisions where we can get slightly more information and come back and just do it again, and keep that iterative cycle short. And therefore, all you're really optimizing for then is, how good is your initial hypotheses? How quickly can you validate or disprove that? And what's that cycle time? If you can apply that to every single task and every single project, then I think you're in a good place.
And attracting excellent talent and ambitious talent, it's easy once you're DeepMind, but it's not easy once you're a small company outside of London. How did you go about in the early days of attracting excellence and attracting ambitious engineering talent?
I think I've been lucky again to have a little bit of experience in my last companies where I could kind of see what good and bad was. And I've seen it both ways, which I think is important. But I think I had proof of work. And, I'd written a lot of technical documentation around what we were doing. It was all reasoned well. The first people came to the factory that I leased personally. I'd welded these systems or built these reactors. There was proof. You walk in here and say, okay, well, clearly, like there's a level of depth here, and I think great people engage with that a lot. And I was very lucky to find our first kind of 5 to 10 engineers are brilliant. They have now set the culture across Rivan. They now hire pretty much LSEG under them. And I think it was really just optimizing for key things like agency, like first principles thinking, and showing them that I had the proof of work, and as such could be a credible leader of like driving this forward. And then I got lucky meeting some of them, I think.
Yeah. And for you, how do you continue to keep the bar high and attract great talent while you guys are growing really fast?
It's challenging. And I think you always have this antagonism with immediate project timeline appeasement versus long-term cultural depth, which is always a challenge. We have a load of really good frameworks now to think about it. So like, we actively train new people how they should hire within Rivan, and what they should, not just what you should optimize for in an interview, but like, how do you think about it? What's the impact of that? I think one of the key aligning features is with every marginal person, we're either massively increasing our cultural density or we're removing it. There's no neutral. And I think if you frame someone as that, it's quite quick that you can tell whether they're going to.
It's like, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no.
Kind of. I think sometimes there is deliberation, but I think a couple of frameworks within that, and then also being really close to it. I think we exemplify our culture far more than I've ever seen in other companies or my other companies, which is great. People now are seeing the impact of culture on the company, and as such, like, team leaders will see it in their teams, and as such, they just won't allow anyone that doesn't reflect that, which I think is critical. If you don't have that kind of input output, it's hard for a leader to like say, okay, as a result, here's the culture we optimize for. And then also we try to be really specific in who we hire for and what the job they're doing. So like, we have to really strain internally before we hire someone, and like, things are breaking, so it always means we're properly hiring for that job or that task or that resource, and not just blasé, we have capital, we need to move fast, let's hire people. And I will, as that goes right back to that first point, everyone will never appease immediate timelines for hiring, which I think is the first thing that slips oftentimes.
Yeah. And Are there any, you mentioned frameworks, what are some really good interview questions that maybe you have used, or are there any?
So I could put you on the spot here, and if you don't answer them very well, then it's going to go well. I think we optimize a lot for first principles thinking, whether you're an engineer or you're a soda developer or whatever. Well, this may sound really trivial, but one of the questions we'll ask is what the limiting factor of a tree is. So you get the redwoods in California, they're 80 meters tall, but their nutrients are, they have enough in the air and the soil to be much, much taller. And there's no competition really, or like, let's mitigate that as a factor. It's really interesting to see. The answer is partially irrelevant. It's more how people reason through that. How do they get there? Where do they start? And you can apply that to the size of planes. Why aren't they twice as big? They're irrelevant of airport infrastructure. I'm mostly interested in things like that. So like first principles reasoning and agency.
Going back to kind of looking after yourself, how do you think about surrounding yourself with people? How do you think about the filter for people in your orbit? Because you did quite an unusual thing. I mean, you raised a very impressive pre-seed. You got a bunch of kind of what you call like tier 1 US angels in very early as well, which is not typical for either the kind of business you're building or the stage you were at. Who do you surround yourself with? How do you think consciously and actively about the people outside of Rivan who are in your orbit, or is it just kind of energy attracts energy?
Interestingly, the latter. I haven't really optimized it at all. I think I spend most of the time with the engineers at work. I'm lucky enough to have a great group that I can spend a lot of time with. I think I spend a decent amount of time and optimize for our investors. So one of our lead investors, Tarvit Harinkas at Plural, I've just learned a lot from him.
Yeah.
I think anyone that's been through a journey.
A few things, that guy.
Yeah, indeed. And very well at massive scale. So I think I can learn a lot through him. And there's a few other investors like him, maybe not quite to that degree, but
like Max, not quite.
Indeed. But yeah, I haven't consciously thought about it. I think what's happened organically is, again, proof of work. Like we're doing real deep quality work on big hardware. I think I've broadly now engaged with like groups that are doing some similar things, so we can kind of discuss how that's going, because very few people understand that outside of it. But yeah, generally I haven't really thought about it too much.
And a bit of I think piggybacking from what Max said about the support system, it's hard to build a company of this level of complexity at this speed. So I assume there's no such thing as a work-life balance for you. And but at the same time, you are surrounded by people you love that not necessarily follow the same speed.
Yeah.
How do you navigate the loneliness of ambition, and how do you make sure that the people you love are well involved and that you're not lonely in the journey?
Good question. I generally don't believe too much. It shouldn't sound toxic, but I don't really believe in work-life balance very much at all, in that I'm very grateful that I get to work on something really important, and I want to do more and more of that.
That's a front page headline of a huge company.
Especially as I take huge amounts of energy from it. I think if I was forced into it, it's a completely different story, right? I've completely optimized for working on hard problems with. I think that's the limiting factor, by the way, in many things. Most people don't love the work that they do, and they often think the limiting factor is money. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that the limiting factor is actually working on something really meaningful that you love, that you have some level of aptitude for, surrounded by people also that love it and want to work on it hard. Like, it's so rare that you get that in a room, and I've just been obsessed by doing more of that. Hence why I just rather do more and more of that. I think also the people that I have around me, like my family and my girlfriend and things, there's never been an alternative to this. So it's not, e.g., I've kind of always been like this, irrelevant of what I was working on. And I think that's kind of just me. And I enjoy that. I take a huge amount of energy from it. So I wouldn't necessarily, it's lonely in the respect that very few people can ever really engage on the depth of actually what you're going through at any one point, because it's really hard to articulate and it's almost impossible to understand, much akin to me with other people. I just wouldn't have the context to understand. But I think that's just part of it. And I think you have to, it's like Frank Slootman has their famous saying that you have to be really, really clear between the ears, and mostly you're just going to have to make all your own decisions and be comfortable with that constantly without external impetus and without external support. And I've kind of taken that on broadly.
And as you bring more people to the team, how are you passing along the important decisions to the rest of the team, and how much of the decisions are still you making now?
We can do way better at this currently, and we're still a small team. But Broadly, I try and do only do the things that only I could do, because there's going to be people that are better than the other things. Anything that others can't. Basically that's difficult because in the early days you're across everything, and ultimately all my role has become and will ideally optimize for is just where is the biggest singular problem in the company, and where can we go right to the root cause of that and reason all the way up and try and solve it quickly and then move on to the next one. And I think therefore it's basically like get something running, get some level of cadence or process in place of a singular project. If it's like a new product or something like that, hire someone that's going to do much better, and they could do it as well as I could at least, and then skip on to the next thing where there is a bottleneck within the company somewhere.
What does failure look like to you? Do you have a failure mode? Do you keep an idea of failure in mind in any way, or is it kind of an irrelevance because you drive forward on it?
The poor answer is pretty much. I haven't really thought about it that much. I guess you could look at it and say, the people often say failure is an object, e.g. like Rivan failing as a company is the object, and that would be the failure. Yeah. I would almost look at it slightly differently and say, like, I think we'll have a profound impact. If we don't, I think the failure will be that we didn't do everything in our power to make it true. And we didn't, do the small things. It's like going back to what I said about execution. It's like everyone talks about, why does this company win and this company doesn't? It's execution. No one really knows oftentimes when they're talking about that, what that matters. And I try and articulate it as execution is in the margins, in the areas you don't see. It's the tiny, tiny sending on email a couple of minutes quicker than someone else did, and suddenly there has this long-term cascade years down the line. You don't see it. And it would be those things that I would think that we would fail at.
It's focusing on inputs, not outputs. The world, like the whole global steel supply could disappear overnight, and you might not be able to control that. But if you'd focused on the inputs, your failure would have been outside of your control.
Also, I generally just haven't really given much thought to it because it doesn't impact what we do today. We focus on what moves the needle today. We'll always do that. We're in survival mode constantly. And I think if we can keep that as a DNA, I think we are robust to black swan events that may often kill others that are classed as failure, but they didn't prepare very well.
And
sure.
And maybe because we're bad podcasters, could you walk the listeners and us through the system of Rivan? So from the solar panels to the carbon capture to the electrolysis and so on. And maybe together with that, how did you think about building the capital stack for such a system?
Like I said before, synthetic fuels are actually quite well known as a process. And you've got energy and vast amounts of...
I'm sorry, just really stupid question. What's a synthetic fuel?
Synthetic fuel is a chemically identical version of a fossil fuel. It just doesn't have the carbon that's being ripped out of the ground.
Sure.
So it's created from carbon that's already in the atmosphere. So if you think about it, every time we use fuels like natural gas or petrol or diesel or kerosene or others, we're ripping it out of the ground. When we burn it, it emits CO2. And then it has, as a result, has a net excess or a net gain of CO2 in the atmosphere. So it's gradually increasing. That never comes down. And the reason direct air capture is important for the world is it tries to mitigate that net gain and just pull carbon down and store it underground. So it kind of reverses the cycle. Many reasons why that doesn't work very well currently. Then a synthetic fuel really takes the carbon from the air, emits it into a fuel and keeps it circular. It basically locks CO2 in the ground, keeps it there and stops us even to frack it or drill or whatever. And it means it can have a profound impact. If you make synthetic fuels cheaply, we will stop drilling and you'll mine the sky, as the kind of saying goes. Now, to make them very simple, you need fundamentally you need hydrogen and CO2. They're the two constituent parts. You combine them together to make any fuel. Also, the two constituent parts for most plastics as well and various industrial processes. But basically, you need those two. To make those two, you need vast amounts of energy. But physically, they just have what's called a thermodynamic limit that's quite high. And really, all Rivan does is we build our own solar, so off-grid or behind-the-meter solar, say 1 megawatt, which is about 2 acres or so of solar, DC solar. It then goes into a chute. It's a big black box. And in that black box, we have a hydrogen electrolyzer that takes water from the rain. So we collect rainwater. You put enough power into that rainwater, it splits it into hydrogen.
And does the source of power matter or not?
It matters that it's cheap and it's green or renewable. You could use nuclear, wind, solar. We own and operate our own solar because it's the cheapest form of power we could get. But then you've got your hydrogen from water. The direct air capture system, all it really is in the air right now, there's about 400 ppm. In here, quite a lot more because we're in an enclosed room, but it means that 400 ppm is 0.04 grams. So you just need the vast amounts of air and something to capture it. So we have huge fans that capture huge amounts of air, like suck it in like a Hoover, strip the CO2 from the air, let the other air bypass, and then suddenly we have CO2. We have hydrogen. We combine them into a reactor, which is basically a really long pressure, like a long pipe, ultimately filled with interesting metals that act as catalyst at a certain temperature. And out the other end, once you feed in hydrogen and CO2, comes CH4, carbon neutral CH4, which is synthetic natural gas. That's our first product. As soon as we produce it, we inject it into the gas grid, which runs everywhere, and then we sell it all over Europe. Because once it's in the grid, you can move it around really easily. So we sell it to very large steel manufacturers or energy traders or really anyone that's looking to decarbonize and utilize synthetic fuels because they're chemically identical, so you don't have to change any process. And we'll start with synthetic natural gas because it's ubiquitous and has a very liquid market. It's very easily transportable. Its distribution is incredible. But we will move into other things, whether that's liquid phase like methanol or kerosene for jets or for long-haul aviation.
So your key headline metric metric, I suppose, is the levelized cost of whatever natural gas you're choosing to produce at that given time, and whether you can, and if you can be, as one of your team said to me, if you can be a cent cheaper than the market, capitalism does the rest.
Yeah, it's exactly that. So we anchor every decision. We spoke about, does it make the boat go faster? Equally, it's like, does this make the levelized cost of methane lower? Every decision is anchored on that. The interesting thing is where we are today, which is only marginally higher than areas of fossil in Europe, especially now macroeconomic war and things like that. Every factor that gets us down to the cheapest, like synthetic fuels cheaper than fossil, is owned by us. It's just an execution battle because we're vertically integrated.
And then how much better for the environment is burning synthetic fuels than just normal like fossil fuels?
I mean, you could take it on its marginal unit base, like a megawatt hour, and say for every megawatt hour of natural gas, something like, I can't remember exactly, but call it, there'll be I don't know the number specifically, but a kilo or a kilogram value of CO2. We just have none of that because we've taken it from the air and it's circular. So I think to quantify it on a marginal basis, it's big, but on a if you transformed or just basically made the entire world use synthetic fuels as opposed to fossil today, it would make life sustainable on Earth. It would be the main thing that stops CO2 rising in the air and stops sea levels heating up. It stops everything heating up.
Especially if your input system is DAC as well.
Exactly. So we have a very simple master plan fundamentally. Number one is capture vast amounts of CO2 in the air profitably, because normally you can't do it. That standalone, CO2 itself has no marginal utility in the world. It means you can't sell it very effectively. So we capture it profitably and turn it into a synthetic fuel. Use those synthetic fuels to decarbonize areas you can't electrify: steel, cement, aviation, things that just doesn't matter where batteries get to. You can't really use them. And then lastly, drive our costs so low that you can just use DAC by itself and capture all the remaining carbon from the air cheaply and quickly. And that as a cycle will make life sustainable on Earth.
And what does it need to happen in the coming years, both in terms of Rivan execution and also in terms of kind of like external factors to make synthetic fuels ubiquitous abundant?
No external factors, no miracles required anymore. I think if we had billions of cubic meters of synthetic fuels today at a certain cost, it would have profound impact today. No change. So really it's a case of, can we scale our manufacturing rapidly to support that, which is what we're working on.
An interesting one for me, because you exited both of your previous companies and are comfortable. It was funny when you said you started raising money for Rivan because you spent too much of your own money on the business. But you've chosen a good quest. You're economically comfortable. If I waved my magic wand and took Rivan away overnight and you weren't allowed to go back to it, what would you spend your time?
Tricky, because I think where we're at now, I see no other work for me ever other than this. It would be going, again, it's what I've really just optimized for deep integrity of work that I think matters.
Yeah.
And I would find another element of that. I find it difficult. I found it difficult now to think that there would be something of the level of impact that we could have.
Yep.
You look at Tesla and EVs, they hold 3% maybe of the entire automotive, or 2% of the entire automotive sales, but they change the entire world to electrification of vehicles. Like that as a catalyst is profound as an impact. I think Rivan can have that. I would immediately go and find something else, because I think that's what gets me out of bed. And I deeply enjoy the difficulty.
Sure.
And maybe before going to the quick fire, we're going to be releasing this as you announce your Series A. Maybe could you say a few words about the round, and also a few words for other founders building in hard tech. How should they think about monetizing and capitalizing their company? How should they think about cost of capital and sources of capital as well?
Sure, and I know you said about the capital stack. So yeah, it's extremely exciting in that we've just raised a £25 million Series A. It's about 12 months or so from our seed, and great investors. So IQ Capital led it with Plural, our main backer from our seed round, and amongst a plethora of other interesting investors. I think one, that's going to give us the capital now to scale our manufacturing and deploy our systems in the real world at scale. A huge moment, I think, hopefully for Europe, in that we can show the validity of what we're doing on a big scale. We've thought, I think, firstly, to your point on cost of capital and capital stack and things like that, I think there is a brilliant opportunity now where the zeitgeist has shifted towards funding of previously unfundable things within hardware. I think it's become a little abstracted slightly, in that people were jumping on that bandwagon without core understanding what it takes, I think, to build these types of companies. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, like more capital inflows, but I think we've basically thought, what is the lowest amount of capital we can raise to do what we need to do before we access the next tranche of capital, which for us is infrastructure funding. And there are key milestones that need to be achieved there, both from a technological perspective, from a risk and finance perspective, from an off-take and customer perspective. And we have basically utilized all of our funding to try and de-risk those to access the next capital stack, considering VC is a small percentage points of overall capital availability. I think that's misunderstood oftentimes, and that this is always and actually,
it's like when you're a venture hammer, everything looks like a nail. And people don't realize there's like 20 different types of funding you can raise for a company like this.
Yeah, exactly. I was lucky though in the early days where I could invest quite a lot into Rivan to get us off the ground. So our seed was slightly more progressed. That helped a lot. But then broadly, we're very frugal, despite ostensibly looking like a very, capital hungry hardware company. We're very frugal, which is a cultural point. But ultimately, it has been to raise as little as we can before accessing the next cheaper capital stack, which for us is debt and infrastructure.
And how early did you start the relationship with infra funds?
It was less how early, because we're still building them now. It was more that from day one, it was a core part of the deciding factor to go into this as a business. You mentioned earlier around like where was the confidence to like go into it and spend the rest of the time on it. It's really a factor of, I thought, the capital requirements or the ability to raise capital because of our ability to raise infrastructure, because of the markets, because of the product, etc., were great. Whereas some products just will never raise infrastructure funding because it just doesn't hit all the core criteria or qualifying points. But that was actually a key point from day one. So we've just been gradually working towards that.
Quick fire questions. No more than a sentence per answer.
Okay.
London or Wiltshire?
London.
Messi or Ronaldo?
See.
Best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Work harder.
What would you be doing if you'd been born 100 years earlier?
Coming up with our reactor design.
What? 100 years
it's about 100 years old.
Are you excited about the future or scared of it?
Very excited.
Do you think ambition is innate or something that can be built?
Innate.
One person who's not on your cap table who should be?
Great question. You.
Most overrated idea in tech right now?
The fluffiness of some of AI applications.
And the most underrated idea in tech right now?
Very difficult infrastructure.
And lastly, what piece of advice would you give to a young version of yourself just starting out?
I would don't lose faith. I've been looking back now. I look back at some of the early days of the first businesses with this melancholy-esque feeling of like the difficulty with like no cash and like very difficult times. But I had this deep belief of something will happen as a result of that. I look back now thinking, great, like we kept at it. I would say that was really important.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, man.
Cheers, guys.